My wife handed me divorce papers at our anniversary dinner while my son raised his glass to toast, not to our marriage, to its ending. 41 years. That was how long I had been married to the woman sitting across from me in that private dining room at the Greystone, the same restaurant where I had proposed to her in 1983. She had worn a green dress that night. Tonight she wore red, and she had brought her attorney. I am 68 years old. I spent 35 of those years as a vascular surgeon at Riverside Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. I have held a beating heart in my hands. I have told families that their fathers were not coming home. I know what it looks like when something ends. I recognized it the moment she slid the envelope across the white tablecloth, careful not to disturb the centerpiece. My son Owen was at the table. He was 34, broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of suit I had paid for when he passed the bar exam 5 years ago, a bar exam he took 4 times. He raised his glass of Cabernet and said with no detectable shame that it was about time. My daughter-in-law Petra, who had never worked a day since Owen married her, pulled out her phone and took a photograph of the envelope on the table. Whether for memory or evidence, I still do not know. My daughter Simone sat 3 feet away from her brother and said nothing. That was the only mercy of the evening. I looked at my wife. Her name is Judith. We had met in our 2nd year of medical school. She dropped out after our first child. She said she would go back. She never did. I never held it against her. I held many things against her eventually, but not that. I picked up the envelope. I did not open it at the table. I set it beside my bread plate, finished my water, and placed my napkin on my chair with the deliberateness of a man who has just decided something irreversible. Judith's attorney, a woman named Hartley who charged $400 an hour, leaned forward. She said I should know that this was a no-fault filing, that the process would be smoother if I cooperated, that the marital assets had already been cataloged by a forensic accountant they had retained without my knowledge. I looked at Hartley. I looked at Judith. I looked at Owen's glass of wine, still raised, waiting for someone to clink it. I said 6 words. I said them quietly, without anger, the way you speak to a patient before you tell them the news that changes their life. You have no idea what you just opened. Owen laughed. He actually laughed. He told me I was being dramatic, that I should sign the papers and make it easy on everyone, that the house in Dublin was already being assessed, and that he and Petra were thinking about moving in once the estate was settled. He said, estate. I was 68 years old, sitting at a dinner table, and my son referred to my life's work as an estate to be settled. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I put $40 on the table for the server who had done nothing wrong. Then I walked out into the Ohio night, got into my 12-year-old Buick that Judith called embarrassing, and drove to the parking garage where I had left the other car. The one nobody knew about. It was a 1971 Chevelle SS in cranberry red. I had been restoring it for 3 years in a garage unit, registered to a holding company my college roommate, an estate attorney named Chester, had set up for me in 2019. Chester was the only person who knew the full picture. He had been waiting for this night for 4 years. He answered on the first ring when I called him from the parking garage. He asked me if she did it. I told him she served them at the Greystone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the words I had been waiting for. He said the clock is running. I told him to start the sequence. I need to explain something about the way I built my life, because what comes next will not make sense without it. My father was a pipe fitter from Youngstown who never trusted banks and never trusted lawyers and was absolutely right about both. He died with a modest savings account and a paid-off house and no debt of any kind. He told me twice, once when I graduated college and once when I married Judith, that the only thing a man truly owns is what he built himself and what cannot be taken by someone who stops loving him. I did not fully understand what he meant until about 15 years into my marriage, when I began to notice the pattern. It started small. Judith managing the household accounts and removing me from visibility without removing me from responsibility. Then Owen's tuition, his apartment, his car, his 3 failed attempts at starting a practice of his own. Then Simone's rehab, which I paid for twice and which I would have paid for 10 more times without complaint because she was my daughter and she was sick. Then Petra, who came into our family like a fiscal event, always with a renovation idea, always with a friend who needed investment, always with her hand open and her gratitude scarce. I kept working. Surgeons do not retire on sentiment. We retire when our hands start to shake. Mine were steady. So I kept going, but somewhere around year 30 I started building a second structure. Quietly, legally, not hidden, but not advertised. Chester helped me establish a medical professional corporation that held my ownership stake in the surgical practice. The corporation was mine, not ours. I had taken legal counsel in 2018 and confirmed that in Ohio, inheritance-funded assets and professional corporation shares established prior to a material change in marital circumstances occupied a protected category. I was not hiding anything. I was reading the architecture of what I already owned and reinforcing the walls. The house in Dublin, the joint investment accounts, the retirement plan Judith knew about. Those were marital property. I knew that. Chester knew that. We did not touch them. What Judith and her forensic accountant did not know about was the rest. The morning after the anniversary dinner, I woke up in Chester's guest room and called my hospital. I informed them I was invoking my right to a medical leave of absence, something I had not used in 35 years. I had 12 weeks available. The chief of surgery, a man who owed me more favors than I intend to collect, processed it by noon. I then sent a single email to the administrative office of our surgical group. The email informed them that effective immediately, I was invoking the succession clause in my partnership agreement. My shares in the practice were being transferred to the Whitmore Medical Legacy Trust, a charitable vehicle named after my father, which Chester had established the previous year. The transfer had been in preparation for 18 months. It was legal. It was irrevocable. It was also exactly the kind of thing a forensic accountant retained by a divorce attorney cannot touch, because charitable trusts in Ohio are not marital property regardless of when they are funded, provided the funding comes from a separate legal entity, which mine did. Judith's attorney filed for emergency asset preservation 2 days later. The judge reviewed the documentation Chester submitted and denied the motion. The charitable trust was beyond the court's reach. I was sitting in Chester's kitchen eating toast when my phone buzzed with Judith's number. I let it go to voicemail. She left 4 minutes of controlled rage in which she called me calculating, manipulative, and vindictive. She said I was destroying the family. She said Owen was devastated. She said Petra was crying. I listened to it once and deleted it. What I want to say clearly, because I know how this looks, is that I did not do any of this out of anger. Anger is a hot emotion. What I felt was cold and mathematical and very, very old. I had been doing the math on my marriage for a decade, and the numbers had not been good for a long time. Judith did not destroy a happy marriage that night at the Greystone. She formalized the end of something that had been ending for years, and she did it in a way that was designed to leave me nothing. The anniversary dinner, the attorney at the table, Owen's raised glass, that was not grief. That was a coordinated extraction. They extracted from the wrong account. What happened next arrived in a particular order, and I want to describe it the way it actually felt, which was less like a revenge and more like watching a building you designed finally fall the way the blueprints said it would. Judith and Owen had assumed quite reasonably from their perspective that the family home in Dublin was going to be the anchor of the settlement. It was a 4,000 square foot colonial on 2 acres that we had purchased in 1997. It had appreciated significantly. Owen had already told Petra to start measuring for furniture. Simone told me this later, not approvingly. What they did not know was that in 2020, I had refinanced the property through the holding company and simultaneously filed a deed instrument that classified the primary residence as a corporate asset pending a documented buyout that had never been completed. The instrument was recorded at the county recorder's office. It was public record. Judith's forensic accountant had reviewed our joint returns and our brokerage statements, but apparently had not walked the 2 blocks to pull the deed history. Chester's letter to their attorney arrived on a Thursday. It was 3 pages. The second page contained a certified copy of the 2020 deed instrument. The third page explained that the property was currently subject to a corporate claim that would need to be adjudicated separately from the divorce proceedings, a process Chester estimated would take between 18 and 36 months. I heard through Simone that Judith threw a plate when she read it. I do not know if that is true. I believe it is. Owen called me that evening. He did not start with hello. He started with an accusation that I had been planning this for years, that I was delusional, that no judge was going to allow me to hide marital assets in a shell company. I let him finish. Then I told him 3 things. I told him that everything Chester had done was legal, documented, and had been reviewed by 2 separate outside counsel in addition to Chester. I told him that the corporate claim on the property predated Judith's filing by 4 years, which made it entirely legitimate. And I told him that if he was going to practice law, he needed to learn the difference between hiding assets and owning them differently. He hung up. The part that is hard to explain to people who have not been in a long, quietly failing marriage is that none of this felt satisfying in the moment. I was not standing in some penthouse watching their faces fall on a security camera. I was in Chester's guest room, or later, in a modest furnished apartment I rented month to month in Clintonville. I was eating soup from a can and reading procedural briefs and calling my daughter Simone every 3rd day to make sure she was okay. Simone was not okay, but she was honest about it. She told me early on that she had known what Judith and Owen were planning for about 6 months before the dinner. She had been pressured to participate and had refused. She said she was sorry she had not warned me. I told her that I would not have believed her if she had, which was true, and that she owed me nothing, which was also true. She was the only one who called me on my birthday that year. The divorce proceedings took 14 months. In that time, several things happened. Judith's attorney, Hartley, went through 3 motions to compel disclosure that Chester blocked or answered with documentation. The charitable trust remained outside the settlement. The corporate claim on the house remained in parallel litigation. What was left for the marital estate was real and significant. The joint accounts, the retirement plan, the brokerage portfolio, and Judith received her portion of it. I did not fight the equitable division of legitimately shared assets. That was never my intention. My intention was to ensure that what I had built through my own professional corporation and my own legal structure was not handed over to finance Owen's ambitions and Petra's renovations. What Judith received was fair. What she expected was different from what was fair. Those 2 things are not the same. Owen did not take it well. He had been operating for months on the assumption that the house settlement was coming, that a lump sum would follow, that his parents' divorce was going to function as a personal liquidity event. When it became clear that the math did not work the way he had expected, he started calling me twice a week with variations on the same argument. I listened to 2 of these calls. The 3rd time, I did not answer. The 4th time, I picked up and said only this, Owen. When you are ready to talk as my son and not as an interested party in an estate settlement, call me back. He did not call back for 4 months. Petra left him in month 7. I heard about this from Simone. Apparently, the financial expectations Petra had brought into the marriage were not being met by Owen's actual income, which, without my informal supplements over the years, was modest. She moved back to her mother's house in Westerville. Owen moved into a two-bedroom apartment in Grandview. He got himself a dog, a large shepherd mix. He named something I cannot remember, and according to Simone, he started cooking his own meals and running in the mornings. I want to be honest about something. When Simone told me about Owen running in the mornings, I felt something unexpected. Not vindication, something closer to the feeling I used to get when a complicated surgery resolved cleanly, a sense that the organism was finding its way back toward health despite the damage. I had not been a perfect father. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. I gave Owen money when I should have given him resistance. I paid his rent when I should have let him figure out the lease. I wrote the check for his third bar exam when I should have had a real conversation about whether law was the right path for him in the first place. I enabled his sense of entitlement the same way Judith enabled her own, by absorbing the cost of it without naming the cost out loud. I am not blameless. I just learned the lesson before they did. 14 months after the anniversary dinner, the divorce was finalized. I was 69 years old. I drove to Chester's office, signed the final documents, and then drove the Chevelle home to the garage in Clintonville. It was late October, the kind of Ohio afternoon that goes sideways into gold around 4 o'clock. I sat in the car for a while with the engine off. I thought about my father. I thought about what he said about owning only what you built yourself. I had built a lot, some of it in operating rooms, some of it in corporate filings, some of it in the patience of not reacting to things that deserved a reaction for years on end, in the holding of a life together with competent, invisible hands, while the people inside that life took the holding for granted. I was not bitter. I want to be clear about that too. Bitterness is what happens when you keep expecting something from people who have already shown you who they are. I had stopped expecting things. That is a different emotion. It feels like open water. In November, I went back to work. Not surgery. I had let the leave expire and transitioned into a consulting arrangement with the hospital's residency program. I teach 2 days a week. I review cases. I work with young doctors who are still in the phase of their careers where medicine feels like a calling rather than an infrastructure problem. I like them. They remind me of who I was before the noise got loud. I also started seeing someone. Her name is Dora, and she teaches environmental law at Ohio State. She is 62 years old. She owns her car outright, has a retirement account she manages herself, and when I told her on our third date what the last 2 years of my life had looked like, she did not flinch or offer condolences. She asked me 2 questions. She asked what I had learned, and she asked what I was building next. I thought about those questions for a long time. Owen called me in December. It was a Sunday morning. He called from his apartment, not from a law office or a position of strategy. He asked if he could come see me. Just come see me. Not to discuss the estate or the trust or the house or any of it. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking and he wanted to talk to his father. I told him to come on Sunday. I made coffee. I made eggs. He showed up in jeans and a flannel that had paint on the sleeve from something he was apparently doing to his apartment himself. He looked like he had lost 20 pounds. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. He did not apologize cleanly the way you see in movies. It was more halting than that. He said he had been raised to see my resources as a fact of the landscape, rather than as something that required any reciprocation or acknowledgement. He said he could see now that was wrong. He said he was not sure what kind of relationship we could have going forward, but he wanted to try. I did not forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness is not something I believe in doing quickly. But I told him I appreciated him coming. I told him I was glad he was running in the mornings. He looked surprised that I knew that, and I told him his sister talks. He smiled. It was a real smile, the one I remembered from when he was small and had not yet learned to perform. He is not there yet. Neither is Judith, who I have not spoken to directly since the divorce was finalized. But I am not waiting for them. That is the difference between where I am now and where I was for the last decade of my marriage. I used to wait. I used to hold the door open and keep the light on and absorb the absence of gratitude like it was a weather condition I had simply chosen to live in. I do not wait anymore. Last spring, Chester and I drove the Chevelle out to a meet in Granville. 200 cars on the lawn of an old fairground. The kind of event where nobody is performing anything for anybody, where the conversation is honest and the coffee is bad and everyone knows exactly what they love and why they love it. I had not felt that uncomplicated in years. A man about my age walked up and looked at the car for a long time without saying anything. Then he said that he had been looking for one of those for 15 years, that his father had owned one in 1972, that there was something about the sound of that engine that still got to him. I handed him the keys and told him to take it around the field. He looked at me like I had offered him something sacred. I leaned against the fence and watched him drive it. I thought about my father's house in Youngstown, paid off and clean. I thought about the gray stone and the red tablecloth and the envelope on the white linen. I thought about Owen and his flannel and Simone calling on my birthday and Dora asking me what I was building next. The man came back and parked carefully and got out slowly, the way you get out of something you did not want to stop. He handed me the keys. I told him I was fine where I was.